Sup YouTube, it's ZapdosTCG here, and as you may have noticed, I've already covered most of the popular decks in our current format, so now I'll be giving a quick recap of all those competitive decks in one video. That way you'll know what's being played and which decks to look out for at cities. I know that most cities in the US are already over, but in Europe we're just getting started, and just so you know, once the new set Next Destinies gets released, we'll have many new deck ideas and deck combinations, so look out for that in the upcoming episodes. Aside to that, let's just start off with the first deck that comes up in my mind is Magnezone Electric, just because I'm currently running my own version of this deck. So how does it work? Well, usually this deck runs Thunderous as the main starter of this deck because you can put energies in play really fast with his attack charge and then discard them with a second attack while dealing a decent amount of damage to knock out some baby Pokemon at the start. And then we have Electric that brings back energies from the discard pile and attaches them to one of your bench Pokemon each turn. So if you have two of those in play, you really have some energy acceleration, and that's why this deck is so good. But not only that, Magnezone is the main card of this deck, being able to draw cards with his Poké Power each turn while dealing an unlimited amount of damage depending on how many energies you're willing to put in the Lost Zone is nothing to be lied about, because he also has an HP of 140, which keeps him out of range of any one-hit KO without the help of plus power, and that's why this card is one of the best out there. And yeah, it's really expensive nowadays. The only bad thing about this card is retreat cost of 3, but with the help of switches in the deck together with Junk Arm, this won't be that much of an issue. Next up is of course ZPST, which was the deck I run for Battle Roads, and I became first with it, so it's actually really good. The deck focuses on getting Pokemon powered up from the start. The main Pokemon here are Zekrom and Tornadus, and you use Pachirisu and Shaman to build up those powerful attackers on your first turn, and that's why this is so good. You can easily get the dunk with this deck. It doesn't really matter if you have Tornadus on your active spot or Zekrom. It can easily have that one hit KO dealing 80 damage with Tornadus or dealing enough damage with Zekrom. So look out for this deck. It's still really playable. It uses Catcher to get prize after prize, so it doesn't really go after the heavy Pokemon, just getting cheap prize cards each turn until they have the 6 prize cards. And now is a deck that everyone hates to play against, Durant, of course. This deck revolves around milling your opponent's deck to win the game, so it's a completely different game style, simply by getting out 4 Durants in play from the start with the help of dual balls and collectors. That way this deck is able to discard the top 4 cards from your opponent's deck each turn, and then your opponent's deck is just a ticking time bomb. Once it goes off, you lose automatically when there are no cards in your deck anymore. This deck also runs lots of twins to get the cards they want, so they'll usually plan on stalling quite a while with the help of Catcher, Lost Remover, Crushing Hammer and stuff like that, so look out for that one. But there's a funny fact about this deck, because we'll have a Durant counter in the future, which will be Heatmore, and this Pokemon can deal 10 damage for a colorless energy, so wow, that's nothing special. Yeah, I know, but it also has a side effect, and that side effect is really devastating for Durant, because it states if the opponent's active Pokemon is Durant, this attack deals 60 damage instead. What? Yeah, I know, that's really crazy, because Durant is also weak to fire, so this card is actually made to stop Durant in his tracks. Even with the help of Eviolite and Special Metal Energies, they'll still be knocked out in one blow with the help of this Durant counter, and it'll be in each deck because it runs on colorless energy, so Durant decks won't be seen that often in the upcoming tournaments after cities. And the next on my list is Chandelure, which is a new deck that came out of Noble Victories. There are 2 versions of this deck, one with Vileplume and another one without Vileplume, but I'll be talking about the one with Vileplume since it's way better. So this deck revolves around getting out Chandelures in play and using the ability to drop 3 damage counters anywhere on your opponent's side of the field. So usually that doesn't look good when you first look at the card, but with the help of Dodrio, I already mentioned that in the episode, so it'll be really flashback for you guys. You'll easily get 30 or more damage on your opponent's side of the field while using only the ability of the Pokemon, so you can easily get energies on your Chandelures as well and then be able to attack after that, which is pretty good. And then there's Vileplume that really disrupts your opponent's setup, because that card blocks all plus powers, switches, Junk Arms, Catchers and stuff, so it'll be really hard knocking out Chandelures in one blow. And if he's your active Pokemon, you can also use his attack, why not? It can burn and confuse your opponent, so that'll be really disruptive when he can use any switches and stuff. So this deck is incredibly good indeed, but the only downside is the slow setup. That's why people run Tropical Beach in this deck, since it's really effective, because you don't plan on attacking in a couple of first turns, so you only use the abilities, but most players don't have that card, so yeah, you just have to use other options. You still have twins and stuff to get out the stuff you want. Next up is Reshifflosion. Reshifflosion was really good when it first came out, and it's still, even though now we have Kyurem in our format to stop the fire Pokemon, Reshifflosion still manages to make its way to the top decks thanks to plus power and being able to knock out those Kyurems in one hit. And I'm sure you all know how it works. Get out 2 Typhlosion Primes together with a Reshiram on the active spot, and being able to use Blue Flare turn after turn to get the prize cards Aside to that, people also run the 1-1 line of Ninetales, or maybe the 2-2 line if they want a heavier draw support, and I believe that's it for Reshifusion. Just pretty basic and pretty good. Next is Vileplume and Reuniclus variants decks, just like Ross Cotton. He invented this deck and made it on 2nd place in the World Tournament, so it actually is a pretty good deck. These decks revolve around getting out the Vileplume to stop the item cards, as I already explained, and Reuniclus to swap around the damage on your side of the field to prevent knockouts. And the main attacker is usually Donphin Prime together with some dragons like Zekrom, Reshiram and stuff, or maybe Kyurem. And lastly there's Blizzy Prime that heals up your Pokemon completely. It's a really powerful card, and I believe that's the only deck, competitive deck, that uses Blizzy Prime, so that's interesting as well. It's really powerful once it's set up, but the only problem here is it's being so slow. Yeah, I know you need some twins, you need to get out 2 stage 2s, that's pretty hard in this deck, and you also need to have a main attacker. This can really cause you some trouble, and the fact that there are Pokemon out there like Magnezone that can completely knock out a Pokemon in one blow is just devastating in this deck. So I don't know if this deck is still as good as it used to be, but we'll find out in cities because I'll go there next week. I will see if I come across some of those decks. Next up is 6 Corners. I made an episode about that deck last week. It was the first episode of 2012, and it's really effective. So basically this deck runs on high HP basics and combines them to work together with rainbow energies, and then they go after the weakness by using Catcher, and usually Virizion as the main starter to begin drawing cards with his first attack and setting up your bench while you're dealing some decent damage with a second attack. It's pretty good, dealing 40 damage and your next turn 80 damage, and then the rest of your Pokemon take over and go after the weakness to go for the win. It's a nice deck indeed, since these Pokemon are really hard to knock out, and they also run on Eviolite, so that's why this deck deserves a top cut in every tournament. I really think it's that good. Okay, next up is Cobalion, Kyurem and Electrode, or rather yet Cake. This deck runs on a high HP basics as well and uses Electrode Prime's Poké Power to blow himself up, and in return you can look at the top 7 cards from your deck and attach all energies you find there, or as many as you want, to your Pokemon and discard the other cards. So it's really efficient to get a 2nd turn Electrode and have that Kyurem build up in your 2nd turn, or maybe Cobalion, whether or not your started Pokemon is different. And yeah, it's really disruptive if your opponent doesn't have a quick setup. Just imagine yourself a turn 2 Glaciate from Kyurem and your opponent doesn't have a good setup. You're sure to win because you can knock out all the pretty low HP basics, which is good. And then we have Cobalion because that's also a pretty good card. It uses the attack Iron Breaker that locks your opponent from attacking unless they retreat their Pokemon or use Switch. And as I said, it's really quick and powerful, but you need some luck on your side, because if the Poké Power of Electrode fails, you're pretty much screwed, because if you don't have any energies in play, this deck automatically loses. And next up is Zekrom Electric and Lantern Electric. Both decks use Electric for the energy acceleration in the mid game. Usually Zekrom Electric is a bit better in my opinion, since Zekrom doesn't have that low HP like Lantern has, but Lantern has a really nice Poké Power to counter fighting Pokemon, which is the main weakness of these type of decks. And that power is it lets you switch its type to water type during your turn, so it can easily knock out Donphins that way, or Landresses without a sweat. And as I said, Lantern only has a slight issue, and that's the low HP, so definitely run Defender if you plan on using that deck. As for both decks, they usually will run plus power, switches, Catcher, and some good supporters like Juniper, PONT, Collector, and the good stuff like that. And the last deck on my list is Donphin and Dragons, or Donphin, Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem. This deck is pretty straightforward, getting out Donphin on your 2nd turn using Earthquake to get the first prizes, spread damage on your own bench as a side effect of Earthquake, and you can use Outrage for your Dragons to go for a certain weakness, whether or not you're up against a certain deck. And it's pretty good since it can counter the most popular Lightning decks at the moment, and also Kyurem can counter Reshifusion, and there are lots of different choices here, and that's why it's one of the most winning decks in cities. And there you have it for the top 10 most popular and winning decks of cities. I know there are many more good decks out there, but I can't cover them all, but I'll mention them anyways because they do deserve recognition. We have Mega Magnezone, which is really good, but lost its power quite a bit since Magnezone moved over to Electric. And then we have Danchamp, also known as Donphin Machamp, pretty good. Also we have Vanillux, Victini, and Vileplume, or Triple V, whatever you want to call it. It has lots of nicknames. It uses Vanilux's attack to paralyze your opponent each turn, so it can move. Then we have more decks like Ambor Reshiram or Ambor Magnezone, but since Catcher is out, Ambor is losing its playability since it can easily get captured. Then we have Kyurem for Alligator, which is straightforward, getting energies to Kyurem on your 2nd turn by getting out for Alligator with a rare candy. And then we have Victini, Sharpedo, and Audino, which definitely deserve recognition because I've seen a couple of cities that actually won with Victini and Sharpedo like that. Audino is a good card in this deck just because it can attack with a Carlos energy and with the help of Victini you can easily manipulate your coin flips. And yeah, there are many more good decks out there, and if you still don't know which deck to choose, I suggest going with one that you play with the most. That way you'll know what to expect in your deck if you draw some cards and stuff like that, and you know how it works. And then if you have a unique deck or an original deck, go with that. It's always nice to see unique decks come up in tournaments. And I believe that's it for this week's deck analysis, or rather, yeah, the top 10 of the most winning decks and cities. Now to Poké-News. Well, there's only one thing on my list this time for Poké-News, but it's really epic, so let me explain it right away. Dragon type Pokemon. Yup, I already talked about them in a bunch of episodes, and now we finally have some scans on how they will look like. Here we see Rayquaza, Salamence, and Hexorus. They just look insanely awesome. I think it's great to have a new type in our format, and one thing I immediately noticed is that they need regular energies to attack, like Rayquaza runs on lightning and fire, Salamence runs on fire and water, and Hexorus runs on fighting and metal. So the special dragon type energy isn't shown here. I guess they plan on releasing that when the full set comes out, or they won't be making it at all, which will be not that likely anyways. Now we see that the dragons have a weakness to themselves, just like they're weak in the game, like dragon is weak to dragon. Now let's look at the cards themselves. We have Rayquaza with an HP of 120, so it's a high HP basic, which is nice, and the retreat cost is 3, which is simply bad, but the fact that he can attack for a simple lightning energy kind of makes up for it. It deals 40 damage, and then you have to discard the top 2 cards from your deck, and that may sound bad, but with the help of a research record you know what you discard, and with the help of electric in the deck it can actually help you out. And then the second attack deals 90 damage, and it isn't affected by any effects of your opponent's active Pokemon, which is pretty good because you can set them up by using Pachirichu, and you can deal 90 damage on your first turn. But still, it's a high HP basic, and I'm sure lots of people will like that due to that reason alone. Next up is Salamence. Yep, he's finally back, and this time he brought a nice ability with him. It's an ability that states your opponents discard cards from his or her hand until he or she has only 4 cards remaining, and this is insanely good in my opinion. You can use cards like N or Spiritomb to inflict some discarding power, and then using cards like Team Rocket's Trickery or something to really disrupt your opponent. Or when your opponent has a large hand, you can easily discard a bunch of stuff like in one blow. It's pretty good, but you can only use this ability once during your turn, so even if you have 2 Salamence you can't even do that much. If you have like Salamence discard cards, then using N you can do another ability like that. So you can only use one of these abilities once during your turn, and his HP is 140, which is great because it keeps him out of a one-hit KO range. And then the attack is the exact same thing, dealing 90 damage, but like Rayquaza of course, but this time around he needs 4 energies, which is terrible. Dealing 90 damage for 4 energies isn't just worth it. But even though you can use double Carlos energies to build him up, it's not that good, and his retreat cost is 2, which is better than Rayquaza's. Yeah. And lastly, Hexorus. Let's see, an HP of 140, nice, but a retreat cost of 3 never is. As for the attacks, for a metal and a Carlos energy he deals 40 damage, and then during your opponent's next turn any damage done to Hexorus is reduced by 20, which isn't that good, but I think his second attack might be a bit better. It needs a fighting energy, a metal energy, and a Carlos energy, but then it deals 90 damage times the number of hits, and you can flip twice. So of course Fliptini comes in my mind if you talk about attacks with coin flip, so you can easily deal 180 damage with the help of Victini. But I still think the EX cards will really overpower these cards because they aren't actually that good. And that's it for now. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button, I always appreciate that. And yeah, thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, thoughts, or epic new ideas, go to the comment section and let me know what's on your mind. Now for those of you that haven't subscribed yet, you'll get a chance at the end of the video as always. Anyway, this was ZapdosTCG. Have a nice day, until next time.